Anne Stoller, I think, needs no introduction to many people. She is Willy Brandt Professor of Anthropology and Historical Studies at the New School. Um, she's in the last 10 years also been led the development of the Institute for Critical Social Inquiry, which she'll talk about later. Um, she's the author of a whole series of important books broadly around colonialism and race, the archive and history, but that is too brief a summary, including, amongst others, duress along the archival grain and most recently interior frontiers. What we're talking about today seems a bit kind of narrowly kind of university focused, but this is a time I think we're all aware for different reasons on both sides of the Atlantic that the social sciences and humanities are being heavily criticized or seem to be redundant. And at the same time, it's fair to say that despite the kind of movements in critical social thought in the late 20th century, disciplines remain very much with us. And so I was very intrigued by Anne's um, uh, proposition of a radical adisciplinarity. How could one possibly train students in adisciplinarity when disciplines have been so central to the ways in which universities function and the ways in which they um, develop students into becoming contributors to the production of knowledge in the future? So with those general thoughts in mind, we're going to focus on the question of ageism, but there's many other things will come into that question. It isn't a narrow question at all. And so perhaps what will happen is that perhaps for the first half of this hour, I will ask a series of questions. And as has been the case in the other conversations, um, those of you who are listening in can post questions in the Q&A. And Olivia Haltman-Entwistle, who attended and participated in Anne's graduate seminar in New York and is a PhD student at UCL, will monitor that Q&A and read the questions out. So to begin with, a question which may seem too broad, you're titled a Professor of Anthropology and Historical Studies. How do you see your own position in relation to these fields? How, in the end, do you describe yourself? Do you apologize for that title, or what do you do? How do you begin?
Well, thank you. Thank you for, first of all, inviting me, Andrew, and thank you for this occasion to sort of play with where we are now and why we need to be perhaps thinking differently about where we imagined we were before. That wonderful question of Kant's is one that holds me very tight. What is this present and where are we in it? Which Foucault resuscitated as a question 200 years later. I think for me, being an anthropologist was always an opportunistic, really, I mean, being very blunt, an opportunistic choice. Because what I really wanted to do was something that I imagined was Marxist anthropology, ecology, geography, something that was grounded in a Marxist understanding of the politics of exploitation and social inequality. And I didn't really care what discipline it was. It seemed that anthropology offered the most space to define what I thought I had wanted to do. It's not that I was a sophisticated Marxist, mind you. I was a neophyte, and I'm reading Capital and reading groups and trying to understand Grundrisse, which I couldn't understand a word of. And but it was the zeitgeist of the time. I'm what the French call a 68er, a 68er. And it was the Vietnam War. That was where we marched, what we marched against. It was US imperialism. It was US military intrusions and interventions and force. So anthropology and history together. Well, first of all, there is no Marxism. That's, for me, that's not historical, because we're looking constantly at the construction of the institutions and of the infrastructure that produces and that enforces and that protects and nourishes inequalities and differences of possibility and opportunity. So studying Marxism, thinking with Marxism, the first thing I did, you can tell me how long you want this one to be, because it's a long story. It
Yeah,
starts off
no,
with my early feminism, going to study the effect of the Green Revolution
mm,
on landless women in Java that nobody was looking at. Everybody was saying, oh, the Green Revolution is so wonderful. World Bank, AID, they're all, tooting their horns over it. And it turns out that poor women in Java were losing their employment, because with the old rice varieties, they were able to cut the stalks with a small little instrument. And with the new ones, men came in and did it with sickles. That was
mm,
what my first work was about. The
mm.
second work was about another space that was supposedly not on the radar of what really people were studying in terms of Java and Southeast Asia, which were home gardens. Home gardens where the poor, who didn't have access to rice land, got most of their nutrients, most of their vitamins from bananas, from cassava, from what they planted, and women did that work as well.
Mm.
So I went to Java when I was my end of my undergraduate, and decided really I wasn't close enough to the belly of the beast. And the belly of the beast for me were multinationals. And I decided to go to Sumatra and study the big and live with the workers who worked in the Goodyear, Uniroyal, the big Dutch plantation companies of rubber and palm oil and rubber. Anyway, that was where anthropology and history for me never could be disentangled, because it depends on the kind of question you're asking.
But so when, I mean, absolutely. But why then not think about it in terms of kind of interference, a point of interference between different disciplines or between different kinds of theoretical perspectives with the kind of background of Marx? But you talk about adisciplinarity. How do you see that as a kind of a useful way of moving beyond
Well, I think
just
I
culture and
see
history?
aegis planarity as sort of a jumping forward
Right.
from a much earlier moment in which we're looking at multidisciplinary. We're looking at, I headed, along with several other colleagues and dear friends, a doctoral program in anthropology and history.
Mm,
It was never ever a notion that I was going to do anthropology. I was reading Emanuel Wallerstein. I wasn't reading Evans Pritchard.
mm,
That's what we were reading. We were reading Andre Gunder Frank, The Development of Underdevelopment. Um, but the adisciplinarity, the radical adisciplinarity, is something that's come to me over probably the last decade, really,
mm,
not before then. And it's a kind of appreciation that that where one is located is not, and wants to be, is not in the constraints that are imposed by a discipline, right? But by the opportunistic way in which one has to ask what kinds of other ways of asking questions are possible in the world. It's really much more focused not on what good history does, but what are the ways, what does history have to offer that I could exploit, that I could draw on? It's actually a much more difficult project than being dual disciplinary or multidisciplinary
yeah.
or taking just two disciplines. It's a matter of being animated by the kind of question you ask and the kinds of questions, the way they're asked in a range of different sites. So for me, there's never been a time when philosophy didn't matter, where literature didn't matter, where poetry had no place, where geography, I always thought I was going to become a geographer, but they were going to close down the department in the first place where I had my job, because they said no one cares about geography anymore. just totally ridiculous. But though that's who I felt closest with in some ways, was to geography, cultural geography. Like, you know, well, look at you, Andrew. How many different disciplines have you come out of?
Well,
That
I've navigated a few, I suppose.
right,
Yeah, but
from physics, sociology. I mean, it all it can do is enrich, but it doesn't mean that you can be a dilettante. And that is what a radical adisciplinarity is in danger of ever
right.
moving in that direction. It's a kind of fine-tuned appreciation and study of particular kinds of tools that are honed in different disciplines in different ways.
Mm.
For instance, the way in which you read close textual reading, right? In literature, right? And in philosophy. You can do a philosophy seminar and read 4 pages of Hegel. We never would do that in anthropology. That would be
Mm.
considered a waste of time. We'd
Mm.
read 3 articles instead, and most of the students would be skimming them.
So, I mean, so I take it, I mean, I think it's what, you know, intrigues me here is what you're articulating here is a kind of how one thinks about the relationship between empirical materials, which in many cases are texts, and kind of broader conceptual initiatives, you know, trying to avoid really 2 mistakes. One is simply to apply concepts to any kind of empirical analysis, and the other is to stick too closely to the empirical, to not realize that actually historical work in particular can have generative kind of conceptual effects.
So
That-
basically I don't see any knowledge. I'm too Foucauldian, even though I never say I'm a Foucauldian, that
Mm,
there is no knowledge that isn't about power
mm,
at the same time, and that is not political. So when I teach on the politics of knowledge. I teach on the politics of sentiment. I teach on the ways in which certain domains are galvanized, are called upon, are harnessed, and used to enforce certain kinds of difference that are made to matter, not differences that are there to matter, but that are made to matter. Probably one of the central questions that I ask myself and my students, and I think it comes out of Foucault's notion of critique, which is one of the many ways he argues that critique should be understood as an ethics of discomfort. Can you find that place, not where you're comfortable and you know all the answers because you're a good Marxist, you're a good feminist, or a good phenomenologist, but the place where you really don't know and can admit to what you don't know and see how you know, where you can question how you know. So one of the places where I start my seminars, this is something Olivia can attest to, is to ask students, no matter what level they are, no matter what paper they're writing, are these questions worth having answers to? Bottom line, are these questions worth having answers to? Not spinning on the wheel of the theoretical point of Adorno's, not spinning on a little point where Foucault borrows from Nietzsche, but why? What are the ways in which one can get some kind of traction
mm,
in understanding the politics and the history of the present? So the relationship that you bring up between the empirical and the analytic, for me, that opens to something that I call, and a term I've used, again, Olivia can talk about it if there's a moment, is what I call conceptual methodology. That there is no methodology that is free floating, that you teach as a separate course and you learn statistics and you learn this and you learn that. Is always tied to the kind of question that you're asking, how you imagine what a problematique is. Figuring out what a problematic is in your work is the hardest thing in the world. It's just, and it bedevils all of us. It doesn't go away when you're a graduate student or get your PhD or you become a Willy Brandt distinguished professor, which is all meaningless. It still is the question, why this problematique at this moment in this way? And how are you going to address it? What are the grounds on which? What's your evidence going to be? Where are the truth claims that you're looking at? And what are the regimes of truth in which you're caught, as well as the ones you're studying? So every time that you move, it's another beautiful definition of Foucault's that I can't help but bring up here, where he talks about critique as a reflective insolence. It's an insolence towards oneself, right? So you can't just be insolent towards somebody whose work you don't like.
Mm.
You have to be actually humble vis-a-vis, reflectively, of
Yeah.
how you imagine you know what you know.
Yes, asking humility is incredibly important, being willing to be wrong, to put yourself
Sure.
out on the line.
Which is hard for graduate students because they're supposed to not, right? They're supposed to show that they're strong and that they're not wrong and that they can move on and that they're going to be good professionals. I mean, it's a very contradictory position they're put in. They have to perform as if they know,
Yeah.
even when they don't. And they know they don't. And professors have to do it too, have to pretend that they know when they don't.
And as you say, asking the right questions is probably more important than finding the answers to those questions, posing the problem in the right way, the appropriate way for what
Yeah,
matters
I
now.
think so. I think that's really it. I mean, I really think that's a much harder venture.
Yeah.
Um,
So I wanted to kind of think about some of the kind of extraordinary, let's say, institutional initiatives that you've been involved in. One I know, which I've much admired, is your project on political concepts, and I wondered which collects an extraordinary series of essays by some fantastic people. How did you conceive of that, or what was the conception of that, and what instructions did you give to people to kind of to produce this kind of idea of an investigation of political concepts?
so it, it, to give you the genealogy, I was visiting in Jerusalem. It was my last visit to Jerusalem because afterwards I only taught in Palestine. But I met an extraordinary, brilliant philosopher named Adi Ophir, who is still one of my dearest friends. And he's probably a few years younger than I, but I still think of him as a mentor because of the way he thinks philosophically and politically. There is no thinking philosophically that is not political at the same time. And
Mm.
Adi had a graduate seminar in Tel Aviv that was on political concepts, but it was only Israelis. So he was still in Israel. And I went back to New York afterwards, after I visited him. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start on my own. A new project in which I invite Palestinians in to do a project on political concepts. And this is going to be people from whatever discipline they're from who want to think about how political concepts are formed, how they operate in the world, what kind of constraints they place, what kind of foreclosures they place on our thinking, and what they animate as well. So one of the most exciting pieces of this project, first of all, there's people in comparative philosophy, history, anthropology. It doesn't matter where they're from. It's asking, can this noun that I've taken always to be just a simple, regular old noun, actually, is it operating as a political concept and shaping the kinds of ways and behavior in which people participate at different times? Is it doing work that is political, even though it's not acknowledged as a concept? So there are two avenues one goes with this project, which we've done for over 10 years. One is to take a concept, a political concept in the world, nationalism, democracy, tyranny. But the other, the one that I love, is the one where you take a noun that is not already acknowledged as a political concept and show that it is. So the first one I took was just the word colony, just, simple old word colony. People are interested, they can find it for free. It's on the website, Political Concepts Colony, and read what I tried to do to show the kind of tensions that it actually held within the history that it contains. It's not a Catholic project. It's not taking the political as what is already deemed political. It's exploring what is newly political in different kinds of ways. It's a project I adore. I just started another initiative in Paris this past year in March called Political Concepts Atelier Paris. And what it is instead of just calling on, I mean, we're all limited in funding, right? Instead of calling on mostly a lot of scholars and comrades in the US, and we have called on some from elsewhere, but our funds are short unless Columbia decides to give us money, and Columbia's not giving anybody money right now, or Brown or whoever. It's calling on scholars here, that here being in Europe, calling on Etienne Balibar, calling on Eric Vassin, calling on Horacio Herrera, calling on people who are already in Europe, and thinking of it as an atelier in the sense that it's not performative. You don't come with a concept already finished, already tied up with a neat bow. You come with something in progress that you're trying to push. So I took the word extreme to look at all the places it splays out towards: the extreme right, the extreme violence, the extreme left. What kind of labor does it do to call something extreme when we know that what was considered extreme has been totally normalized and now is at the center?
Mm.
How do you respond to that shifting ground?
Mm. Mm.
So that's the new initiative that's coming out. But there's another initiative that's come out
I
of
mean,
it.
I would just say, I mean, it's what intrigues me though. It's sort of with Foucault, he was preoccupied with, if you like, by many of the forms of knowledge very much associated, let's say, with government and the state, even though he critiqued the notion of the state. But actually, you're expanding that to the whole lexicon of categories which are far beyond what we normally think of as to do with government.
Absolutely. So we have one that was blood, the word blood.
Mm.
Right? I mean, blood and soil. I mean, these were the idioms of Nazism. There are so many. What it makes you do is it makes you move between the metaphoric and the material. It makes you move outside of what you've already ordained as the political, to see all the different forms in which a whole range of fields can contribute to define the aesthetics of the political as well. The other, just very shortly, this excited range of great graduate students at the New School, and they started a political concepts of graduate students, and their contributions are probably as strong as any of the faculties.
Mm.
And they're publishing those as well as we speak right now.
Mm. Tell me, I mean, one of the things which I've mentioned is one of the great strengths of American universities is a very strong commitment to graduate seminars, which is perhaps less true here because of much shorter PhD studentships and so forth, and a lack of tradition as well. How would you kind of see the function of what you're trying to achieve in a graduate seminar? What would be the...
Well, I live by graduate seminars. It's what inspires my own work. It's what I'm inspired to see, how it fires up students to think in new ways. I've been very fortunate that when I was at the University of Michigan for 15 years, because of what I taught in the history anthro program, I taught almost only graduate seminars. When I got to the New School, I was given a position in which I did not teach undergraduate, but only graduate seminars. So for some 30 years, what I've been committed to do is to use graduate seminars as a launching pad for new projects, not to inundate the students with only what I'm interested in, but to put some element of what I'm grappling with as one of the weeks or one of the themes, and have me push and they push on that. And each time teaching it in new ways. So right now I'm teaching a new course, well, I've teaching a course I've taught twice now, which come out of my archive work, called Documentality, the politics of archives. So not only is it about documents on paper, but it's about all the way in which documentation has shifted over time, right? It's about videos, it's about texting, it's about film, it's about choreography. But it can't stay still. It's mobile.
Yeah.
And what I love about graduate seminars is that if they work the right way, there is so much that comes from the students themselves. I mean, Olivia's contribution to it was stellar. She kept saying, "No, I'm not contributing anything," and over, just kept offering us more and more. Every single person in that seminar last year did brilliant work. They weren't all at the same level. They weren't all at the same level of sophistication, but it's how they engaged one another. So instead of it being a dyadic relationship between me and the student trying to impress me, it ends up being something that is much more rhizomic, that is actually building on the interstices between different students working on different projects, but perhaps that can inform each other. And right now in the fall, I'm teaching a graduate seminar called Grammars of Time. Well, I've taught it twice, but it can't be the same as it was before with Trump. Trump has done something to time. He's done something to temporality. He's done something to the vitesse and the recursive quality, turning back on exactly what he just did. The seminar this year is going to have to be radically about what is this present and what kind of temporalities are we living in now?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe this is a good moment, as you mentioned, Olivia, as well. If anyone in the audience, particularly graduate students, wants to pose a question in the Q&A